Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, August 9th, 2023. Time for another show. That's the way things go in the mornings here, and hopefully the way things go in the mornings for you there, too. Although maybe you're an afternoon podcast listener. I don't know. It's time for another show for me. Eventually, if you're hearing this, obviously, it has become time for another show for you, even if we're not in sync. Okay, the big story of the day is I'm awesome. Yay, what a great story. Yes, but that's not the story. The story is Ohio is awesome, and more specifically that cool people, including extremely young voters and university campus voters, are awesome in Ohio and elsewhere. But Ohio is the story of the day, I think, in terms of electoral politics. As you know, and as we've been watching, as we've been explaining all along, and that's been a part of it, right? The organizers there, organizing against the Republican effort to sneak one by on everybody, have done a great job getting their story out to the newspapers, so that's where I can read it, and then I can say, hey, this is an outrage, like everybody else. And lots of people will get outraged, and then they go out and they vote. So, earthquake last night in Ohio. They overwhelmed the Republican sneaky plan to try to, one, break their own law about when they can have these sorts of votes, and two, push people out of the way and not allow them to participate in their own democracy. That was the big underlying theme of all of that, was that when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and basically says, all right, fine, send the abortion issue back to the states, as they've been preaching since forever. They've always been saying, well, Roe was wrongly decided, we should overturn it. And then 50 years later, they finally do. The big excuse the whole time was that the states can regulate it, so they send it back to the states. And the states basically, one by one, are saying, all right, well, no, we don't agree with getting rid of abortion or restricting it to such an extent that you've basically banned it. We're going to overturn all of, the outcome of the upshot of what has come out of the Supreme Court, and we're going to preserve our rights in this state. And as Republicans see that, surprisingly enough, happening to them in state after state where they thought they would win running away, they have not yet learned to run away from the issue, and they keep pressing it. But as they started to see themselves losing these things all the time in Ohio, the example is they said, well, we'll break our own rules about when you can do this sort of thing, because maybe we'll be able to get it done in a low turnout election and sneak a restriction past people, or at least smooth out the runway, clear the decks for beating them in November. Well, okay. One, that didn't work. Two, they, may not have beaten anybody in November given the way things are running. It was an overwhelming victory for the no side on the Republican proposal to require 60% be the threshold in order to pass any new constitutional amendments, etc. And I don't even know. They may have, at that point, continued on and required that it be 60% for the passage of any citizen ballot initiative. But at any rate, they were rebuffed at every turn. Enormous turnout, for one thing. I have seen reports that I have already forgotten and didn't put aside, so that I don't have proof of how big the turnout was, but people were mentioning turnout larger than many regular general elections, but I fail to see how that could be possible. But maybe that was in fact the case. There were reports that, again, I didn't put aside, that the vote near, I guess it must have been the Ohio State University, I guess the campus kids there turning out in great numbers, and they're not even largely, I don't think, back on campus yet. But at any rate, those who were registered in and around the campus area were voting in the 90% plus range on the no side, and counties that Trump had trounced his opponents in, even though he lost the election in Ohio, likewise came out with vast majorities, well over 60% in favor or rather against this proposal, and therefore it is presumed in favor in November of enshrining abortion rights in the Ohio state constitution. All right, yeah, Greg saw the same numbers, 98% around the Ohio State University campus. Chris Geidner, I did manage to put this one aside just because it was a very specific example. He says, in just one sign of how far Ohio Republicans overstepped here, no on issue 1 is winning by 1 vote right now in Ohio's Clark County. Now, no is the position we wanted, but only winning by 1 vote. But where? Ohio's Clark County, which Donald Trump won in 2020, one of the few things he actually won, by a 60.8% to 37.5% margin. An enormous victory, an enormously, overwhelmingly pro-Trump vote in Clark County, and yet not even eking out a win, at least at that point. And with a literally a 1 vote lead, that could obviously have changed. But it should never have been close by, I imagine, by most predictions in Clark County in Ohio. But maybe we have some results. I don't know. Greg, have you heard about this thing in Ohio?
I did.
Okay. So
big deal.
There you go. Yeah, it was.
Or as Joe Biden may say, a BFD.
Yes, right. With an emphasis on the F, the way he is.
Well, fair election.
Yes, big fair deal.
Big fair deal.
Right.
Stephen Wolf, Politics Wolf, writes, nearly as many Ohioans voted in an August special election on a ballot measure just indirectly about abortion as voted in the 2014 midterms. That's why Republicans are so scared of abortion rights being on the ballot in November 2024 in Arizona, Florida, Missouri. 3.1 million voters. That's a lot.
Yeah. And,
it turns out that in red states, really the only way to deal with the fact that the gerrymandered in power Republicans have let power gone to their heads and are trying to thwart the will of the people, which so clearly don't do this, that ballot initiatives are the only way. And guess what? They work.
Yeah. So that's why they wanted to destroy it so badly.
And kids vote. And that's why they want to restrict voting on children. Children being anybody under the age of 45.
Yes.
What they're actually doing is they're making it hard to vote on campuses. Non-official Republican representatives, that is to say, the right-wing radio shows, the people who really run the Republican Party, have all suggested at some level or another, get rid of the kids and raise the age. So they haven't gone that far, but they have done a lot with restrictions. And this is just part and parcel of the whole thing. We want to do what we want to do, and if you don't like it, then we'll just change the rules. And Ohioans said we don't want any part of that.
Good. It comes in I think it comes at a good time. It's in a good context. For broader thinking here right now, if you don't, if you don't do things the way we want, we'll change the rules. And if we can't change the rules, maybe we'll just break the rules and pretend they were the rules the whole time, as we find out in the January 6th
Trump
case.
does it. Why can't we do it?
Yeah. Well, you'll find that there are a lot of things that he does that just don't translate to you. I mean,
and there's things he does that in the end come back to bite him. So you'll see. We'll find that out on Friday when we have the hearing about, whether or not he can just go and say nasty things, but also potentially dangerous things about potential witnesses. So we'll see. We'll get to that. Right now, the big story is Ohio. This is a piece from Politico. Abortion rights won big in Ohio. Here's why it wasn't particularly close. And the answer is, as you read through it, it was a bad idea.
Yeah, well.
Just like in Kansas.
Duh.
Opponents also frame the victory as one that protects the power of the simple majority. I think sometimes a lot of these fights get viewed in a single entity, and the state gets viewed in a single moment. Said Ohio Democratic Party Chair Liz Walters, who, by the way, is very good, like Ben Wickler in Wisconsin. And I get that, but democracy matters everywhere. Pointing to Arkansas and South Dakota, where voters similarly rejected efforts to implement a supermajority requirement for ballot initiatives. So one of the things going forward to next November, this coming November, is going to be phrasing this and framing the Democratic point of view as supporting freedom. Republicans and right-wingers don't own the flag, and they certainly don't own freedom. And
That's
you want to
for
have a
sure.
freedom caucus?
Boy,
This is
holy
the real
mackerel.
freedom caucus.
Right. You're the Taliban caucus.
So defending democracy is, in fact, not one of those things that you can really poll and get a sense of. And we'll get to a little discussion about polling in just a moment. But here are 3 takeaways from Tuesday's election in Ohio. Abortion is still a serious turnout driver.
All right.
Anti-abortion messaging isn't evolving or resonating. What the Republicans try to do is not go after abortion directly because they know their position is unpopular. So they like to phrase it as, and you'll be familiar from experience in Loudoun County, phrasing it as parental rights.
Because how do you become a parent, actually,
parental
now
consent.
that I think about it?
And gender-affirming care for minors.
Yeah, that's grandparents'
And so
rights.
it's entirely a parental issue. And that's what they went with.
Interesting.
While
given
the Democrats
how you become a
went
parent.
with, you're trying to interfere in the bedroom with really steamy ads. And the Democratic side won big, and the Republican side, taking this parental rights thing, has failed over and over and over in different states.
Yes.
And they say, yes, well, we're going to keep doing it.
All right. I mean, that's kind of why I know it's a distraction. I keep slogging through this latest Loudoun County piece in the New York Times. This is the origin of the idea among Republicans that the parents' rights thing was a winner, and it turns out it may just have been a colossal coincidence / mistake from the beginning.
Right.
But
and
they're
as a
all
matter
in
of
on
fact, in that point, the biggest loser in Ohio was Frank LaRose, who is their Secretary of State who pushed this, who also wants to run for Senate. But arguably, based on what you said and what you've been covering, the second biggest loser was Glenn Youngkin, who thinks this is a great idea.
Right. And he'll never have to stand for re-election to find out that it isn't.
But he has national ambitions. Not this year.
I guess so. I mean, he must, because otherwise he's retiring.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right.
And the third takeaway is the fight drags on because Republicans won't give up on this.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's probably true. All right. Well, good job, Ohio. I did see one great line that I didn't get picked up anywhere, but best summary of the work of the night in defeating, what was it, initiative? I don't know what they call it. Issue 1, I guess, because it was the only one on the ballot.
One died in Ohio.
Yeah, one dead in Ohio. Okay, that's right. Good call. And you can sing it and everything.
Yep. So this is Ariel
dance to
Edwards Levy. I still remember her from the old, late, great Huffington Post pollster, mystery pollster. CNN poll, abortion's role as an electoral litmus test hasn't faded a year after Supreme Court decision overturning Roe. The new poll suggests that the issue's importance as an electoral litmus test hasn't diminished. In May 2022, immediately after leaked draft of the Dobbs decision, 26% of Americans said they would only vote for a candidate who shared their views on abortion. In the latest poll, it's 29%. 55% say they'd consider a candidate's position on abortion as one of many important factors for a combined 84%. And just 16% say they don't see abortion as a major issue. Record low.
Mm-hmm.
Now, more than this, Ariel Edwards Levy actually had a whole thread about this and said there's a lot in the piece, but I want to pull out this slightly wonky crosstab on cross-pressured voters, which demonstrates nicely why any attempt to measure an issue's electoral impact is complicated. Okay. And here's the passage. The view that abortion is a key voting issue is most common among partisans whose views on the topic align with their party. It's likely to further entrench polarized voters, more likely than to help swing voters or swing wavering voters. 36% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents who disapprove of overturning Roe say they'd only vote for a politician who shared their views on abortion. 30% of Republicans say that.
Okay.
By contrast, and here's the point, just 12% of Republican-aligned Americans who disapprove of Roe, that is to say, abortion rights believers who are Republicans, just 12% of them say they consider it a crucial voting issue. So if you find Republicans who agree with you on Roe, that doesn't mean you've convinced them to vote for you.
Okay, yes.
I agree with you, but I think other things are important, like the economy and racial issues and other things. So I'm going to vote for Republicans, even though I agree with you on this issue. Say
Yes.
these Republican-aligned Americans, and that's what she means by cross-pressured. So there are persuadables, but this might not be the issue you persuade them on.
Maybe not.
This issue is a get out the base vote.
Okay.
Other issues like freedom,
I love that one.
are maybe you can convince persuadables. And that's how you put together a coalition that gets nearly 50% of the vote, 60% of the vote, rather. 58%, 57%, just like
50
Kansas.
is usually what you need, but, we'll
No,
take
but
58.
well, they wanted to raise it to 60. They
yes,
almost got
that's
there.
the problem.
And in Ohio, which is a red state, getting 56, 57% of the vote on your issue and winning is huge.
Yes.
It's a landslide.
The issue that was supposed to, for decades, we were told, define what made Republican voters Republican.
Yeah.
And it never was true. Never.
She says, Ariel
amazing.
Edwards-Levy says, economic issues are still the dominant issue,
Okay.
but the salience of abortion has risen, especially on the left, and electoral effects depend on if issues matter to swing or inconsistent voters. In close races, small effects matter. And also, by the way, some issues matter whether or not they help you in the election, like
That's true, too.
this one.
That would be nice to point out.
So she reminds us of that. And Ammar Musa had a great thread talking about how people try to analyze what's going on with the abortion issue and get things wrong. And again, Ariel Edwards-Levy points out you have to really dig into the polling to sort of understand it to get an idea of what's going on. This is from November 2022, just before the red wave election that didn't happen.
Okay.
But everybody was expecting it to. This is the
Sure.
New York Times. Check out this headline. At campaign's end, Democrats see limits of focus on abortion. Shock and outrage over the fall of Roe v. Wade has faded as confusion has spread, deflating Democrats' hopes that the issue could carry them to victory. That was wrong.
Yes.
Okay. And interestingly, that same author, Lisa Lear, today had a piece, Ohio vote shows abortion's potency to reshape elections.
What do you know?
So, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. Here's another good one. Ammar Musa says, do voters care about abortion heading into midterms? A recent poll found abortion was only the fifth most important issue. It may be the fifth most important issue, but, when you combine it with freedom, all of a sudden it's a lot more important than that.
That's true. And, right, I mean, it could be normally it's the number one issue, but at the moment we have to save democracy,
Exactly.
avoid autocracy and fascism.
Right.
Okay, those are huge and important. And when they're finally finished with, abortion will be back at the top of my list. Along
October
with something about the
2022,
kitchen.
Democrats' reliance on abortion for midterms may not be enough.
Okay, yeah, lots of these things.
Some question whether it will pay off. Remember, Democrats are bedwetters. Democrats have
worried
pitched their
about
midterm
this.
outlook on abortion, but as the final stretch approaches, some question whether it will pay off. That for some reason, Democrats use the political press as therapy sessions.
Huh. They
Can't help but have doubts. Then they feel like they have to call their favorite reporter and tell them about it, usually off the record.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, that's true. If that's the dynamic
Republicans
of it, that
are
really is
always
amazing.
confident they're going to win, even when they've just gotten their head handed to them, like in Ohio.
That's true. They probably still
It's
think they'll win
amazing.
in November on this.
The difference between the parties on this is just, astounding.
Yeah.
And consistent. And it's been consistent for years.
That's true. It's just a democratic thing. I could understand it if a reporter called me and said, analyze this, I'd be like, well, once I'm going on
analyze this,
record, I'm
buddy.
now worried. Now that you ask, and I have to put my name to it, even if I'm anonymous, I'm just going to be like,
get your
gosh, I don't know
analysis
what's
right
going to
here.
happen because, I'd hedge about everything because I'd be worried about things. Republicans are never worried about it. They say it. They may know in their heart that they're not right. Doesn't matter. That's the messaging.
Joey Garrison,
course, if
USA
you
Today.
called a
Again, this is
reporter,
back in November
then you're a
2022.
jerk.
Why Biden's closing argument worries some Democrats and could miss the mark with midterm voters. Or
I mean,
how about
it
this
could,
one?
but it.
How Democratic
didn't.
leaders have failed in their abortion rights response. Democrats have failed to grasp the breach in our political reality caused by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Or Democrats focused on abortion rights worry they're losing independent women. Some in White House worry abortion message bungled before midterms. These are all real headlines.
Yeah.
Democrats are suddenly playing defense on abortion, says Yahoo News. These are all back in November 2022. They were all incorrect. They were all wrong.
Yes. Oh, please, just give us a sign.
Right, October 18, 2022, by Hannah Trudeau. Abortion as a closing pitch was always going to be risky, but up against the economy makes it look fringe. Of course, many people will disagree with this, but the cost of gas is extremely important, and nearly everybody, abortion is simply not.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why everybody expected a red wave. And that's why these pundits were all wrong.
Yes.
And that's why you really should take punditry with an understanding that it's a 50-50 proposition. No matter how firmly and no matter how much as a pack they report things, half the time they're wrong.
Yeah, well, it's easy
Great
to
example.
do. And if your normal sources come to you and say this same thing over and over again, I'm worried about it, I don't know if it's going to work, well, it's hard to blame them for writing it, although...
It's the same damn person doing their therapy by press. They keep interviewing. You don't know, because like it's anonymous.
Yeah.
Right? Off the record.
Yeah, sometimes unanimous.
Same guy.
Anonymous.
I don't feel better after talking to this reporter. I'm going to call up some other reporter and tell him my concerns.
That's
and
the part that bothers me, right? You calling them. Like if they call you and ask for a prediction, I don't know what to say. I'd probably say the same thing. But then if I were just sitting at home saying, man, I don't know, I'm worried. The idea of picking up the phone and saying, reporters, you should tell everyone else that they should worry too. No.
It's probably not how it happens.
Leave them
it's
alone.
Pretty funny thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? But that's true that we could stand for a couple of columns from people who wrote those other columns saying,
right.
Well, we had that way wrong, as opposed to just presenting the opposite as true and pretending you had never said previously said the opposite. But that's for the opinion columnists, I suppose, to do. And if they do that, then they won't be hired as opinion columnists anymore.
But while Democrats, and again, to be fair, this was back in October, November 2022, but flash forward to reality.
Yes. What
to
now?
give you an idea of how this really plays out in the real world. This is from the Keystone, a newsroom site. Of course, Keystone State, you'd think Pennsylvania, and you'd be right.
All right, cool.
Republican nominee for Pennsylvania Supreme Court wiped anti-abortion language from website.
Oh,
Carolyn Carluccio, the Republican nominee for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, removed her resume highlighting her anti-abortion stances from her campaign's website. The since-deleted resume's top line stated she'd be a defender of all life under the law.
Yeah.
So there's an open Supreme Court seat.
That's
the resume, which was originally posted on her campaign's About page and was accessed through an internet archive, uses coded rhetoric stating that the judge is a defender of Second Amendment rights and all life under the law.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she's not. But that used to be the code that was the campaign in a box way to win.
Right.
And now they realize the box has fallen apart. That's interesting. So they run and hide from it, which is interesting on a number of levels, but not the least of which is the collapse of the wink wink code that you could get all the Republican votes that were gettable out there by flashing pro-life credentials. So long as there was the right to an abortion, you could win Republicans with notions of moral objections to it and then shaking your fist at it. But once
the dog caught the car, that whole program collapsed. That's just
incredible.
Astounding, but true.
Yeah.
And now they can't just say, okay, we're pro-life, because everybody knows that's unpopular.
Yeah. Huh.
So they've switched to a different kind of coded language. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get the Loudoun County approach of, well, it's all about parents' rights, really.
Yeah, well, that ain't going to work either for a number of reasons all by itself. So, all right. What was it? Keystone Newsroom. Keystone Newsroom.
I think I gave it to you, but if
I see it.
I'll give
I've
it
got
to you
it
again.
It made me think of the short-lived Keystone. It made me think of the short-lived Keystone beer brand from like the 80s, 90s, I don't know. They had some notion in their head that they had an awesome lining to their can that made the beer terrific. It was probably as fresh as the day it was brewed. It just was not brewed all that well. But okay. Keystone for when you can't find Milwaukee's Best or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, I remember that thing. I think that was just prior to the maybe the ice brewing phenomenon that came and went.
Cold brewed, ice brewed.
Yeah, I mean, it's all pretty... All right, well, anyway, never mind.
But in England, you drink it warm.
Yeah. Oh, that should have been more popular, the ice brewing. But it's not icy anymore, so never mind. Okay. Right.
So back in March 2023, there was this New York Times article, Republicans face setbacks and push to tighten voting laws to college campuses, and a whole list of different states that tried to do different things. While some people overtly talk about raising the voting age, so you don't get kids to vote, what Republican officials are really doing is just making it hard for college-age people to vote. Like, for example, not allowing your college ID as a accepted voter ID sort of thing.
What? Even if it's a state college?
Yeah. But some states, like Virginia, right, you told me this, basically supply you with a voter ID, and they make it relatively easy for everybody.
They do. They give it to you. It doesn't have any picture on it, but they do give you one.
Yeah. Whereas other states, you got to jump through hoops to get to where you need to go.
Yeah. They still give you one here in Virginia, but I think they no longer... I think now that we've had some Republican control for off and on, they no longer accept that as ID. They still need to ask for your driver's license now. They used to not. Now they do. So... whatever, I don't know. Maybe they don't print those things.
The point is, if a state wanted to give everybody a card, they could.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are the Ohio State University loving podcast, at least for today. Congratulations to Ohio. We can take a tour of the rest of the country if you like, but Ohio. Good job.
Oh, Ohio.
Yes. So we had some ideas in mind. Did we say on the air what we were going to do when we come back, or was that off the air?
I don't know. I want to mention Tommy Tuberville's threatening national security has spilled over to Nikki Haley, saying this is really not a good idea.
Oh.
So we'll see what happens. There's moves, and the people running for president who aren't Donald Trump are making certain moves that were unthinkable a month ago, like criticizing Tuberville for this over abortion. Results yesterday help Nikki Haley grow a spine. Other things that are happening, it's not just Chris Christie now, Asa Hutchinson, even Ron DeSantis, whose diminished campaign is really in trouble. They not only had to fire the campaign manager and instead hire a 35-year-old who's never run a campaign before because he's running out of people to hire. He's just just hire your wife as the campaign manager and get it over with already. And there was a New Hampshire poll that came out yesterday. Ron DeSantis was at 9%, single digits.
Huh.
Talk about a death spiral for a campaign.
It's the highest single digit, though. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lovely digit, 9. It's one of the better ones, but still, you know, that's a low number for the guy who has the greatest chance of challenging Donald Trump.
Right.
So there's other reports that people like DeSantis are staying in the race, and others might stay in the race longer than you would think it's, you know, time to get out. Not just because they have funding from individual donors, but because they think maybe the best thing to do is just stay viable until such time as Donald Trump gets convicted, and then maybe magic will happen and a miracle, and then I'm the president.
Sure. I mean, it's a play. It's and it makes a certain amount of sense, especially if you are not burning your own money to do it.
Yeah, exactly right. So the other big story that happened today was the New York Times reporting a previously secret memo laid out strategy for Trump to overturn Biden's win. Hear about this one?
I have, and I'm glad that it's being explained a little bit more. I mean, it is the memo is what you think it is. They just say, what if we just tell Pence that someone else won the election, and he agrees to say so? The end.
The existence of the December 6, 2020 memo came to light in last week's indictment, but its details remained unclear. But a copy obtained by the New York Times shows for the first time that the lawyer, whose name is Co-Conspirator 5,
Kenneth Cheeseborough,
like I said, acknowledged from the start that he was proposing a bold, controversial strategy that the Supreme Court likely would reject. In other words,
me too.
Look, I know this is illegal,
right?
But
I mean, right. I'm going to go to the Supreme Court and I'm going to argue if we take a steamroller from this street crew over here and run over every Democrat,
but even if it's illegal, it has advantages in doing it. Basically, he argued it would focus attention on claims of voter fraud and buy the Trump campaign more time to win litigation,
which they were losing.
Right. The memo had been a missing piece in the public record of how Mr. Trump's allies developed their strategy. In mid-December, the false Trump electors could go through the motions of voting as if they had the authority to do so. And then on January 6, 2021, Pence could unilaterally count those slates of votes rather than the official certified ones. So while the basic plan was known, the document described by prosecutors as, quote, the fraudulent elector memo, end quote, provides new details about how it originated and was discussed behind the scenes.
All right, let's hear about that.
Among those details is Mr. Cheeseborough's proposed messaging strategy to explain why pro-Trump electors are meeting in states where Biden was declared the winner. The campaign would present the step as a, quote, routine measure that's necessary to ensure that the correct electoral slate could be counted by Congress if courts or legislators later concluded Mr. Trump actually won the states.
Yes, that's an important part of the conspiracy, right? This is our original plan. And there's a feasible reason why we're doing it, and then when that falls apart, they switch.
However, the indictment portrayed the December 6 memo as a sharp departure from the original proposal, becoming what prosecutors say was a criminal plot to engineer a fake controversy that would derail the proper certification. I recognize that what I suggest is a bold, controversial strategy. There's a quote, and there are many reasons why it might not end up being executed. But as long as it's one possible option to preserve it as a possibility, it's important that the Trump-Pence electors cast their electoral votes on December 14th. And then 3 days later, Cheeseborough drew up specific instructions to create fraudulent electors in multiple states.
Yes.
So, again, this goes back to this whole idea, well, we don't know what Trump really was thinking. Maybe he really believed that he won. It doesn't matter.
No.
Is you writing down an effing criminal conspiracy? Yes. Here's the memo.
Yes, and there's a memo about changing the memo to make it more criminal than it was before.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I mean, it was known what they were trying to do, but it's always helpful to see them writing in real time. One, what the plan is, and two, writing. I think this is illegal, and even a crazy Supreme Court wouldn't be likely to endorse any of this. We're going to lose eventually, but let's do it anyway, because maybe we'll take over as dictators in between now and when the Supreme Court rules.
By the next day, the indictment said Mr. Cheeseborough's memo had reached Rudolph W. Giuliani, Mr. Trump's personal lawyer, whose real name is co-conspirator number one.
Right, Rudy Colludi.
Yeah.
Loves colluding.
Co-conspirator number one spoke with someone identified only as co-conspirator number 6 about finding lawyers to help with the effort in 7 states. An email reviewed by the Times suggests that particular conspirator could be Boris Epstein. You know, it's funny, that still hasn't been nailed down, number 6.
Yeah, right. It's sounding more like him, but it's still not entirely clear.
What we need is, of course, for, while we're all waiting for Fani Willis to indict Trump next week in Atlanta, for this week, we need Jack Smith to unseal some of those other indictments.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
But I think he's waiting on
there's
the
definitely
Friday
more work
meeting
going on
with Judge Chutkan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. But there's clearly more going on, and there's clearly more investigating happening, different angles on multiple fronts.
You remember the Marshall McLuhan scene from Annie Hall?
Only because we talk about it a lot.
Because he stepped out of the line and said, you know nothing about my work when he was hearing somebody else misdescribe what he did.
Right.
So in an essay published on Tuesday in the legal website Just Security, Lawrence Tribe said Mr. Cheeseborough's November 18th memo, quote, relied on a gross misrepresentation of my scholarship.
Oh.
It's a very long scholarly article saying Mr. Cheeseborough quoted me as justifying what he was doing, but you know nothing about my work.
I see. That's not hard to believe.
So that's all background for what's going on here. And again, this is simple and complicated. It's simple because Trump tried to overthrow the United States government and basically orchestrated a conspiracy, approved of it, let it go, to have it happen. That's simple.
Okay.
Bringing it to trial is complicated. And, of course, you could successfully, I think, argue that Merrick Garland waited a little bit too long. He needed to be prodded by the January 6th committee. The January 6th committee was amazing because they found all the stuff they found, put it together in a coherent form for the public to digest, including news reporters. And that goaded the Justice Department, as the reporting goes, to do what they did. On the other hand, it's a really interesting Marcy Wheeler piece today, the overt investigative steps into Trump's co-conspirators that TV lawyers ignored, with everybody complaining about the Justice Department not doing anything.
I see.
Number one, the Jeffrey Clark investigation, he would be otherwise known as co-conspirator number 4.
Right.
That started at the DOJ Inspector General.
Yes. Right.
Okay. And that was at least a year ago.
Right, I guess so. I don't remember.
So the original, we're looking into it. That goes back a while. A privilege review of Rudy's devices was set in motion in the Ukraine investigation in April 2021. Some of these things Marcy's pointing out go back 2 years.
Yeah.
So there's been 2 years of work leading up to what Jack Clark put together, not all of which was done by the January 6th committee. Some of it was done by the Department of Justice. Clark's not the only one of Trump's co-conspirators against whom investigative steps occurred in 2021, when TV lawyers were wailing that nothing was going on. Take the December 6, 2020 Ken Chesebro memo that forms part of the progression. It's not clear where DOJ first obtained a copy, but one piece of it was available, which DOJ took steps to obtain starting in April 2021, and which other parts of DOJ would have obtained by January 2021. And that was on one of the devices seized from Rudy Giuliani in the Ukraine influence peddling investigation, which they had to go to court to be able to read, and the special master had to go through it and decide what was attorney-client privilege. You may remember all of that.
Yes.
That was all prep work for everything Jack Smith did, and that takes time.
Yes, okay. I mean, it's fair enough. It's interesting that a lot of the things that are now part of the January 6th case were initially part of a a separate investigation.
Yes.
Entirely. And
so that's what they mean when they say this is a sprawling investigation.
Yes.
What does that mean? Well, that's what
true.
This means.
But it's also not entirely clear that there's a direct path from discovering a memo that has to do with something completely different during a Ukraine investigation. It's not an automatic, like, well, we already discovered it here. Anybody want to investigate this? It's usually then suppressed as evidence in the Ukraine case. But, I guess once you bring the January 6th case, then you say, well, we know of the existence of this thing. Can we now have it? Yes. Here you are.
Yeah. The investigation of Sidney Powell's graft was overt by September 2021. The investigation into one or more of the 6 co-conspirators, she's number 3, I think.
Yes.
Described in Trump's indictment was also overt in 2021. Subpoenas sent out in September, along with allegations that Powell's associates had made damning records of her, were first reported in November of 2021. The investigation may have started under the same theory as Jack Smith's recent focus on Trump, that Powell raised money for one thing and spent the money on something else, her legal defense. Molly Gaston, one of 2 prosecutors who was shown an appearance on Trump's indictment and who dropped off her last crime scene cases in March 2021, played a key role in the investigation. So Powell was getting a ton of donations in the aftermath of the election.
Yes.
And the donations were often given haphazardly, sometimes as $1 bill or quarter, taped to a postcard addressed to her office. By some claims, she had amassed a fortune contribution somewhere between $20 and $30 million.
Wow.
She claimed, but no evidence to support the claim.
Oh.
And then where did the money go?
Not me.
And so that was part of an investigation that was looking at her. All that graft would directly overlap with the sole focus on Powell in the indictment on her false claims about voting fraud, particularly relating to Dominion. Aside from a claim that Powell was providing rolling production of documents, it's not clear what further steps this investigation took. So we have to see if co-conspirator number 3 has been indicted or will be indicted and what that's all about. But Marcy's just reminding us that people were looking into this 2 years ago.
Well, all right. That was nice of them.
Then there's John Eastman, who they were looking at as well. And so she writes, we know a fair amount about where and when the investigation into 4 of Trump's 6 co-conspirators came from. And for 3 of those, DOJ took investigative steps in 2021 before the January 6th committee set out their very first subpoena. But because these investigative steps didn't happen where most TV commentators were looking, which is to say leaks from defense attorneys, these steps passed largely unnoticed and unobstructed. So it's not fair to say that that Merrick Garland wasn't doing anything. It is fair to say he wasn't moving fast enough. You can always, get him on that. But the idea that he was doing nothing simply isn't true. Some of that stuff just had to ripen.
Okay.
And now that we can see the whole bigger picture, it all fits together. And so, it's really complicated to put this together, figure out what's going on, and then present it to a jury. That's the complicated part. But the idea that Trump was trying to steal the election, that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
And by the way, the process of stealing the election, some of his subordinates were trying to steal money for themselves.
Yes, and so was he. So
those are all separate charges.
Yes, they can be. They probably will be. All right. I mean, it helps to explain them alongside the other ones. So they probably won't wait all that long to make them charges too. But they can go to trial on one of them. But if they want to bring it as evidence, maybe they ought to charge him on the things.
Maybe they ought to.
Okay.
Charles Franklin the other day, I don't remember if we covered this on the show. If we did, we'll cover it again. Had a tweet that says, it seems widely believed that Trump has been boosted by indictments, at least among Republicans, but my MU Law Poll National doesn't show that.
Oh. All right.
With Republicans, Trump favorability is down 6 and unfavorable up 5, comparing January-July 2023 to January-July 2022, a year ago. So it matters. And so all of these new indictments, including the one that we expect next week from Fani Willis, including the constant, as we talked about on the show before, there's always a Trump story in the news to cover. Even with the big Ohio result, there's always a Trump story to cover regarding his legal woes. He's leaning into it and say, this is wonderful for me because it shows the deep state is after me. Yet it matters for everybody besides Republican, primary voters. And for Republican primary voters, it's getting to the point where you have to acknowledge the fact that it's helping Trump with them, but that's helping Democrats by keeping stronger candidates off the ballot.
Yeah. Okay.
And ruining weaker men like Ron DeSantis.
True also. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Did we? It sounds like it sort of rings a bell, but I mean, that's been the trend. So maybe it wasn't Franklin's recitation of the fact that we did. But if we didn't, if we did mention it, it's worth mentioning again.
All the shows we did over the last week.
Who's going to do that? Right. Okay. Well, it bears repeating, even if we did.
But if anybody out you remember me saying that, well, pretend you just heard it for the first time today.
Right. Or, I don't know, tweet or toot or something and acknowledge that you had heard it before. But.
Meanwhile, Chris Christie and Donald Trump are making fun of each other's appearance.
Well, all right. Let them do that.
Donald Trump called Chris Christie a fat pig. Chris Christie said, "That's tough talk about my appearance from a man who looks exactly like a low-priced honey-baked ham in a suit."
It's a long walk versus fat pig. But all right, I'll take it because we're not supposed to be the ones doing that.
It and said, Chris Christie's like the sacrificial pace setter in a marathon. He's not going to win, but he makes the race so much better.
Yeah, I like it. It's worth having.
He'll be on stage along with Mike Pence. And Ron DeSantis and Ramaswamy, who wants to raise the voting age to, I don't know, 65 or whatever. Yeah. And it's not clear whether Trump will be on that debate stage.
Right, because
his smarter advisors are saying, don't go. And some of his advisors are saying, yeah, but you get to go and you get to hit them. And
yeah,
love that.
He would like that. I mean, I don't know how he comes down on this one. I think he wants to go and fight.
Right. He wants to go, but the smarter people will say, you don't need to. You're the front runner.
Never mind. He'll be there.
Let the children at the children's table debate.
Yeah, I don't think he operates.
Do you remember those days? That, for example, you may have forgotten this.
I'll try.
But Lindsey Graham once ran for president, like in 2016.
Yes.
And there were so many people running, they had to have two debates. They had the one with Trump, and then they had the children's debate with Lindsey Graham and a couple other people who probably you don't even remember.
Yeah.
And so when you have the children's table debate, like, nobody watches.
Yes. That was...
So that's why it would be dumb for Trump to go.
Right? Yeah.
But he's dumb, so maybe he'll go.
Right. I mean, that's the basic... bottom line of it is, and he loves to yell at people and beat them up. And I guess anybody else who would have, he might want to go and punch down, but debate rules and no, but he'll just ignore that too.
Right,
and,
exactly.
The 3/4 of the transcript is him saying, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me," and just yelling at people.
Right.
So, all right, he may go. All right, cool.
You may go. You may go.
You may go now, sir.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Joe Sudbay, by the way, on Ohio, pointed out that the yes on the issue number 1 made transphobia a key part of their campaign message. And they avoided really talking about abortion. And, it's so clear and part and parcel of what they're doing. It's just something as a reminder to watch for everywhere else.
Okay.
E.J. Dion writes, in the Ohio GOP scam referendum, the majority backed majority rule. When you do everything you can to rig an election and still lose, you have a problem. Ohio's voters sent a message today about democracy, abortion rights, and manipulation. And I think that is a key thing for Democrats to run on.
All right.
Now, Paul Waldman has a piece. So why leftists, this is all from the Pundit Roundup, why leftists should work their hearts out for Biden in 2024.
Because if he doesn't win, we're in trouble.
Right. So just do it.
Okay.
Philip Bump writes in the Washington Post, is a Ron DeSantis slide reversible? Probably not.
Okay.
And then I have that New Hampshire GOP primary poll from New Hampshire Journal. Coefficient is the pollster. Donald Trump 43, Ron DeSantis 9, Chris Christie 9, Nikki Haley 7. Obviously, New Hampshire's Christie's best state. He has no other best state.
Okay. That makes it the best.
But, it'll be fun to see how he does there. Because if Christie passes DeSantis in New Hampshire polling, what an embarrassment for DeSantis. Nikki Haley at 7, Tim Scott 5, because everybody knows Tim Scott's on the move, except for people who actually are voting.
He went from 2 to 3 and 3 to 5.
Yeah.
That is on
Wow,
the move.
how fast he moved up. Well, that's because he's going to stay at 5. Vivek Ramaswamy at 5, Doug Burgum 4, and Mike Pence 3.
That's up for everybody. Everybody gained a point off of Trump.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's good for them.
Right. Greg Sargent points out, by the way, speaking of Ohio,
What?
in
Have we spoken of
Lordstown,
Ohio?
General Motors closed a plant, even though Donald Trump promised the workers it would stay open.
Sure. Okay.
If Biden can work something out with the UAW and EV electric vehicle plants near Lordstown, that would be a feather in the cap for him.
Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, that'd be a nice thing to do. So, yeah, I guess the moment Trump promises it's going to stay open, you start planning for it to close.
Right. And I'll just mention in passing, the final piece here, Jack Goldsmith had a well-discussed piece in the New York Times. The prosecution of Trump may have terrible consequences.
Well discussed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Judge Ludick weighed in. Josh Marshall weighed in. Norm Eisen weighed in. All with the same point. Goldsmith says, here's the reasons why prosecuting Trump would be bad. Firstly, Smith could lose the case. And secondly, Mr. Smith's indictment outlines a factually compelling but far from legally airtight case. But even if the prosecution succeeds in convicting Trump before or after the election, the cost to the legal and political systems will be large. There's no getting around the fact that the indictment comes from the Biden administration when Trump holds a formidable lead in the polls to secure the Republican Party nomination and is running neck and neck with Biden, the Democratic Party's probable nominee, and then goes through all the nonsense about, and people really care about Hunter Biden and this, that, and everything else. I heard this argument during the Nixon era. And it unfortunately prevailed with Gerald Ford, who pardoned him, and that was a big mistake. Mm-hmm. Trump should be prosecuted for the same reason Nixon should be prosecuted. No one's above the law. And that's the argument that Judge Ludick and Norm Eisen and Josh Marshall and everybody else who weighed in on it said, you made the case for why things would be bad if Trump were prosecuted, completely ignoring, well, what if we don't? And the what if we don't is even more powerful.
Yes.
And so that's the part that's completely missing from this. Jack Goldsmith, as a former Bush, legal official and very conservative, it's like reading an editorial from the old National Review before they went nuts.
Maybe,
let's just take the most conservative part and just slant it to, please our audience, but leave out the really important parts like, what if he just did nothing and said he's above the law?
Yeah, which is what would happen if you did do nothing or whether you prosecute the case and lose or do nothing.
Judge Ludick, to make the political case as opposed to the constitutional case is to miss altogether the case for the nation, which is the imperative of the prosecution and trial for the former president, lest he finally be allowed to make a mockery out of America, the Constitution of the United States, and the rule of law. Thank you, Judge Ludick. You got a point there. Norm Eisen says the great Jack Goldsmith's op-ed on the Trump indictment is articulate, provocative, and wrong. The terrible consequences, he speculates, are dubious, but the terrible consequences of not prosecuting are greater and more certain. Josh Marshall essentially said the same thing. Yeah. So, again, because it's in the news and because it was being commented on, thought I should mention it. It's also all included in the Pundit Roundup for today.
All right. Well, we'll take
and that's what I got. I'm done.
I had missed that, but it's not surprising for Jack Goldsmith in the end, honestly. But I think he'll come around also in the end. I don't know why he didn't consider...
Well, the thing is, the weird thing about his, and Armando pointed this out, he doesn't have any problem with the documents case being prosecuted.
Oh.
It's
well,
this
that
one.
is interesting.
And why?
Okay.
And that's because the documents thing is straightforward and a slam dunk. You did something wrong, you have to be prosecuted. Whereas this one feels political.
Well, not to me, but all right. I mean, I see where he would be the sort of person who would feel it was political and worry that it's the old Republican canard. Every time you get caught, you scream that you're criminalizing politics.
Yes. Basically what happens is that partisans like Goldsmith see this going on, and then whether they overtly or covertly or just in their back of their mind subliminally think, if this goes forward and he's convicted, it's going to hurt my party. I can't have that.
It doesn't matter. I think what he's leaving out of the calculus here is, we'll be doing so much damage to the system. And the answer to that is...
The system is the Republican system.
Well, yes. And if he's not prosecuted, then what system are you talking about? The man forged electoral college certifications. What system are you talking about? If you can do that and not be prosecuted for it, what system do you think you're saving? The system's out the window, and he threw it. Why would you not prosecute that? What the system of what? Free and fair elections?
Right.
Well, they're gone.
Again, it's not what he thought. It's not what he said. It's what he did. He's not being prosecuted for lying. He's not being prosecuted on First Amendment issues. He's being prosecuted for what he did.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that Cheeseborough memo sort of cuts out the whole argument that Goldsmith is making about it feels political. No, it's not. It's right here in writing.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing. Yeah, right. So it's not even, it's no sort
Same
of
paper.
Political theory. It's him saying, and not only laying out the plan, which everybody should know inherently is wrong, but admitting, by the way, all the courts are probably going to think this is wrong too, but so what? Let's do it because there might not even be courts when we're done with this. What the hell? Go for it. But the idea that you need to preserve the system, for the good of the country, you need to forgive and forget. It's like, well, for the good of what country? The one that has elections to decide who's going to lead it? Because they're not doing that anymore. If they aren't prosecuted for this and we don't set this right, there's no such thing. Cast your ballots all you want. If you can just make up certificates that say Kang and Kodos won the election and the vice president happens to be a fan, what country are you preserving? That's nothing to worry about. Let's lose that immediately. I'm pro losing that system. So I don't know where Jack thinks he's living, but it's not on this planet. Wrong. Okay, thank you for bringing it up, Greg.
You're welcome, and we'll bring up some other stuff tomorrow, I suppose.
Okay. Let's do that, and I don't know. When does the next day come? It's like 24 hours or so. 23 now. So,
Ohio's going to change the rules.
Okay, that's right. We need 60 hours
Make it
in order
16.
to be a day. All right, thanks, Greg. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Which direction to go in? Well, I'm going to fight the current. There's lots to talk about Ohio, lots to talk about the indictment. We'll get back around to it eventually, I am sure, I hope. I'm not that sure. But I've set myself up in the beginning of the show and talking with Greg, but I still believe that is now maybe more important than ever, given the Ohio news. I connect it back, and he has agreed with me, so there you have it. It's unanimous. Or at least 2 judges on a 3-judge panel. I don't know who the 3rd judge is. They didn't show up for work, so we win. That the Loudoun County gambit is of tremendous importance and underlies the continuing Republican mistake, or at the very least is the underpinning of the next stage of the continuing Republican mistake with abortion, right? It's not working, but it's just a framing issue. We'll just call it a parental rights thing, even though in this case, if you're talking about abortion, the parent is right in front of you. You mean grandparents' rights, and that's a new thing, and it's going to make you sound weird. But that's why I think it's important, for that and a number of other reasons why it's important to go back to this Loudoun County examination in the New York Times. Where we left it, we had started in on the part where the various individual components of the controversy, which Republicans succeeded in fanning the flames of and in confusing and conflating things with their base, such that it looked like it was a slam dunk in their favor, turn out to, in fact, be complicated, nuanced, and looked at closely begin to make some sense. Like, for instance, the incident in which Republicans made great hay out of, when the girl at the center of the school sexual assault portion of the telenovela here is initially attacked and speaks to school authorities, and they notify the parents, and the parents show up. And you, if you accept the Republican narrative of this, you would be at a minimum left wondering why a parent who shows up to in response to a notice from the school that his daughter has been raped at the school could, under any circumstances, find himself being escorted out of the building and in trouble with the law, when obviously the bigger trouble, as the law should see it, would be the rape itself. So how could that possibly have happened? And in the Republican telling of things, it's an outrage, it's liberals run amok, it's da-da-da. They're so intent on protecting their precious position on transgender rights that they're willing to stomp on the rights of everyone else. And da-da-da. But as it turns out, yes, the father turns up. Yes, he's going to be irate. Yes, there has to be room to understand his anger and deal with it. But, underlying or overlaying, I guess, really all of that is that dad shows up without an ID, which immediately causes a problem. It's understandable how that could happen, but it does happen. But yeah, in Loudoun County, and I'm sure in other schools around the country, you show up angry and screaming at the intercom, and where's your ID, sir? And F you, I don't need one, and you better let me in. And then the cop says, all right. Ordinarily, the answer to that is you lock the school down and call the police, and they come and surround the guy who's screaming, demanding to be let in, and demanding to know where one student in particular is so that he might inflict some violence on that child. You would say, well, this is a pretty clear-cut case of a potential school shooter. We got to deal with it that way. But he says he's the father of this girl. There's no other reason. There's no public information out there that would enable a lunatic to become aware of this and pretend to be the dad in order to gain access. So it's probably the dad, right? Let's go collect him, and we'll send the police, the school resource officer out there. He's used to dealing with this sort of irate person, and we'll fix the problem that he doesn't have his ID, and we'll make it work. But the guy's not having any of it. He's immediately threatening violence against the cops. The cop is understanding enough anyway and brings him into the building regardless. Well, it puts it aside. Given the circumstances, they get inside, and now the guy is now making threats against the at that point, alleged perpetrator, but we also know that he actually was the perpetrator. But which at bottom comes down to there's a guy in our school, with a reason or not, is making threats to inflict violence on one of our students. And worse, that is now being observed by other students. And even worse than that, now being observed by other students armed with smartphone cameras and access to social media, such that it's now is in fact leaking out into the public some portion of what's going on here. So that's where we had set things up and left it, right? So here's the part where the cop, Tavis Henry, comes out and says, I'll come out and meet you. And Mr. Smith here says, I'm coming through the door, effing maybe, tackle me or escort me, your choice. It was intentionally belligerent. But again, we understand the pressure he's under. When Smith met Flynn outside the main office, that's the principal, I think, he was enraged and very loud, acting aggressively enough toward Flynn that Henry, the cop, places himself between them. Now, in hindsight, Smith acknowledges, well, I was upset. Well, that's true. At this point, Deputy Henry here calls for more deputies and walked Smith out of the building, which again is also a reasonable thing to do and a reasonable presentation of it. Like, okay, you're upset, you're angry, you're beginning to threaten violence. let's not let this go any further. Come with me. Let's go outside of the building. Take a deep breath. Talk to me. I'm a sheriff's officer. We're going to get you briefed on what's going on with your daughter. We're going to get your statement. We're going to tell you all the things you need to know. Let's just step out and do it as calmly and rationally as possible. I understand the emotions here. We can't just erase them, but we can handle things in a better way. That's okay. But of course, it's presented as he was thrown out. He was tackled to the ground. He was arrested. Anyway, until recently, our reporter reminds us, the only detailed firsthand account of the confrontation to be made public was Smith's own, which would shape much of the political narrative around the sexual assault. In his telling, Henry and the school authorities had seemed frozen and inattentive to the task of investigating his daughter's assault until Smith arrived, demanding action. Now, of course, if Smith hasn't arrived yet, how in the world could he know whether Henry and the school authorities were frozen and inattentive to the task of the investigation? He wasn't there to observe it. But it's better if he says that they were, because it helps excuse his arriving irate and disrupting the whole process, which is what happened. He disrupted it. Things became frozen and inattentive to the task of investigating the daughter's assault when Smith arrived, because he necessitated a diversion of all attention and resources to him. In other words, he arrived and made the rape about him. And all the investigators had to focus on him instead of the daughter, which is actually a huge mistake. But, I understand how it could be made. Mistakes get made all the time. But it was a mistake. So, in court this June, Flynn, I think that's the principal, and Henry gave a different account. Who could have imagined it? Smith's belligerence, Henry said, made him, quote, shift my attention, unquote, away from investigating the assault. And his outburst had occurred within earshot of students, many of them with phones and social media accounts. This was bad, Flynn recalled thinking. Flynn and the district administrators hurried to put out a statement before the inevitable rumors started. They already saw them happening. The kids have the phones. They're going to start rumors about angry guy in the hallway, something, screaming about violence, yes, but also screaming about a rape. And right, he's correct, there was one, but kids, who knows what they're going to do with it with their cell phones and social media platforms. So they send out an email. The email to district families mentioned the incident with Smith, because that's what the kids would have been tweeting about, though it did not name him, because that's the correct thing to do. And it made no mention of the sexual assault, because they hadn't established what had gone on there. And this was about what the kids were possibly filming and telling the world about. This was, district officials later testified, not a strategic omission, but rather a reflection of school policy, given that the episode was under investigation. And school staff members remained uncertain about what exactly occurred in the bathroom. This is only moments, an hour or so after it had happened. Henry's interview of the girl had been cut short by her parents' arrival. She would not be interviewed by a detective until later that afternoon, and he would later testify that he at first assumed that the bathroom encounter was consensual. He had seen the same boy and girl holding hands in the hallway in the past. Wade Byard, that's the public information officer who went on trial, the popular guy who tells you when school is closed. Wade Byard, the school district's public information officer, later testified that it was, quote, as far as we knew, a boyfriend-girlfriend situation that had somehow gone in the wrong direction. Smith disputed that his daughter had anything resembling a relationship with the boy. They were never boyfriend-girlfriend, he said, though the text messages tend to tell a different story. Dispatch records from the sheriff's office that day described the incident in cautious terms, reporting that the girl had, quote, made allegations of being possibly raped or touched unwanted by another student. That's as broad and as cautious as it could possibly be. There was one detail, though, that seemed to concern school administrators immediately. The boy, when he entered the girl's bathroom, was wearing a skirt. So apparently that part is true. It was this fact that prompted Kevin Lewis, the district's chief operations officer, to email several of the district's top administrators that afternoon announcing that he was convening a virtual meeting to discuss the situation. The incident at SBHS, he wrote, is related to Policy 8040. That, of course, as it turns out, is an error, but because skirt was mentioned, apparently Kevin Lewis makes the assumption that, well, why would a boy be wearing a skirt if he's not trans? And the answer is, well, he may be transvestite, but not transsexual, so forget about it, or transgender, rather. Is oh my God, like the old, ancient, outmoded anti-PC version of the notion comes out. Sorry about that, but it's a huge assumption. And I mean, I understand why the mistake is made if you just don't know that there's any difference or think it's fairly common now. I mean, really, quite honestly, it's fairly uncommon, I think, to just be dressing in the other gender's clothing without also professing an identity with the other gender. Although I guess you can be, well, I'm non-gendered or gender fluid or binary or what have you, and therefore the mode of dress doesn't tell you anything. But at any rate, he makes this assumption and then therefore makes the error that the incident is related to Policy 8040, even though the policy hadn't been adopted yet, I don't think, or implemented at that point. But it doesn't even matter. It's not. That's the issue. But it comes up. The proposed transgender policy was not the school board's idea. That's another important point. It was required by a law that Virginia's Democratic governor, Ralph Northam, signed in March of 2020 at the end of a whirlwind legislative session by the newly Democratic-controlled State House. The new law required school boards to adopt policies in line with a model policy from the State Department of Education establishing transgender students' rights. In effect, this kicked the policy debate from the state level, where the Democrats held power, down to the county school boards, where conservative activists were becoming a formidable force. Dozens of these activists went to speak at the Loudoun County School Board's May 25th meeting, as did a Leesburg Elementary School physical education teacher named Tanner Cross. He was mentioned earlier in the story. And we know of his case. I'm a teacher, Cross said, but I serve God first. And I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa, because it's against my religion. It's lying to a child. It's abuse to a child. Cross's comments drew widespread attention, and he was placed on administrative leave. Over the following days, angry emails began arriving at his school, some of them coordinated by the anti-racist Facebook group. Cross's, quote, reluctance to show respect to a child by using their proper name and pronouns can result in their death. Christina Kroll, and you understand because it prompts suicidal tendencies when you can't get anybody to acknowledge your identity, right? But this comes from Christina Kroll, a former school board member herself, and she wrote, to me, that makes Mr. Cross a weapon, and weapons are not allowed in schools. Well, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that logical progression, but it's an interesting thought. And more interesting still, when they said Cross's comments drew widespread attention and he was, and then they got a bunch of angry emails, I would have thought initially that we were getting angry emails from parents supporting him and wanting him reinstated. So it's a surprise all by itself to find out that some of the early initial comments were from people supporting this suspension. Anyway, one mother wrote that her son loved the gym teacher and, as a little guy, always felt strong and good about himself under Mr. Cross's teaching. But the boy's older sibling was non-binary, the mother explained. That's interesting. They have been through a lot this year. Depression, self-harm, an assessment showing a risk of suicide. This is a mental health and safety issue for both my children. That's an interesting situation and therefore a good point. When Cross was suspended, the county's long smoldering tensions exploded. The Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative Christian legal organization, dispatched a lawyer to represent Cross in a lawsuit against the school district. A judge ordered him reinstated that June. He later settled with the school district, and the suspension was wiped from his record. In a sermon, the pastor of the conservative evangelical megachurch that Cross attended accused the school board of, quote, emotionally abusing our children by perpetuating lies about gender confusion, unquote, and let volunteers from Ian Pryor's recall effort gather signatures at the church. We were cooking with gasoline at this point, Pryor said. All right, so important introduction here also of the Alliance Defending Freedom. I believe that the writer explains exactly who they are along the way, but if the name rings a bell for you, yes, also the group that took up the 303 creative case and various other similar anti-LGBTQ plus positions, and is also in the news currently for something else we haven't mentioned yet, but I just will acknowledge that I've seen the story and we'll find some time to talk about it, but there's a pending case against a religious freedom case filed against Southwest Airlines, in which the judge, a Trump appointee, has issued an order requiring that the lawyers for Southwest undergo a religious freedom education course because, of course, they something and have not satisfied, to the judge's point of view, a significant enough tolerance for religious freedom. So, I mean, one, that's an awfully weird thing to mandate for anybody, but two, that the course that they have to take is going to be taught by the Alliance Defending Freedom. That's their content, which is amazing. So now you have to, if you get in front of a Trump judge, you might find yourself having to go under re-education programs designed by the Alliance Defending Freedom to instruct you how to properly think about religious freedom. This same group, which of course is insisting that a proper view of religious freedom means that you can suppress or even oppose the very existence of LGBTQ plus communities. That seems like something less than freedom when you're defending stuff like that. So anyway, another thread to connect to later. But that's what's happening now, or in this retelling of the Loudoun County story. So Scott Ziegler, the school superintendent at the time, who approved Cross's suspension, watched these developments closely. He was promoted to interim, not acting, but interim superintendent in the middle of the pandemic, when many of the school controversies were already underway. I knew it would be rocky, he told me. From his seat on the dais at the school board meetings in the spring of 2021, he watched the machinations of Ian Pryor, whom is described here, I guess, as a quote from Ziegler, perhaps, as, quote, a kind of out-of-work Trumper, and noted what seemed to be a direct pipeline from the public comment speeches to Fox News highlight reels. Yeah. At the meetings, he told me, he and other administration members would quietly bet one another, quote, how many trifectas we were going to get in public comment. That is, how many speakers would bring up COVID, critical race theory, and transgender policy inside of their allotted 60 seconds. Ziegler, who is now 55, was a Dead Kennedys and Ramones fan in his youth and a police chaplain, and for a time, a Republican in adulthood. Important to recognize. Anyway, over the course of his career as a teacher and then an administrator in districts across the state, he came to lean left on most social issues, and on the issues that had lately roiled his district, he was unequivocal. In other words, he learned by experience from the people around him and the people he was trying to serve. They wanted him to lean left, and he accommodated in many instances too. That's pretty amazing. I think that schools should always be welcoming for all students, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, sexuality, all of these things, he said. The bathroom incident at Stonebridge High School happened at the precise moment that Policy 84 became a statewide political story. It wasn't yet a policy, but it was a story anyway. Ziegler And it's important that it wasn't yet a policy. You can't blame it on the policy if the policy doesn't exist. Not to mention, you can't blame it on the policy if the facts don't fit the policy. Ziegler told me that when the administrators assembled for their virtual meeting on the afternoon of the assault, or in another conversation that day, he asked Tim Flynn, the Stonebridge principal, whether the assailant was transgender. Look, the kid is not transgender, Ziegler recalled Flynn saying. He runs with the drama crowd, and you know how the drama crowd can be. They're attention-seeking, and he's been experimenting with different looks. He wore skirts on occasion, but he has never come out to the school as either non-binary or transgender. Flynn did not respond to requests for comment, it is noted here. The boy's mother described her son similarly. He had presented to me this desire to explore a different lifestyle, she said, which involved sometimes wearing women's clothes, but he was, quote, absolutely not, unquote, transgender, she said, and, quote, he did not identify as fluid or anything like that. If the boy had never, to anyone's knowledge, identified as anything other than a boy, Ziegler reasoned, then he would not have been allowed in the girls' bathroom under Policy 8040 any more than he would have been under the existing rules. Ziegler told me that when Beth Bartz asked her question about the bathroom assaults at the June 22nd school board meeting, he understood it to refer to assaults by transgender students, which the board members had been discussing. The answer to that question was and is to this day no, he told me, a point that he made directly later in the meeting. But whatever his intentions might or might not have been, his answer was on its face false. And it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Remember, this is the controversy of, well, the school board covered it up and school officials covered up the attack. Beth Bartz asked, we view her question as being, has the school board got any knowledge of any assaults of any kind in the bathrooms by transgender students? And he said, or I don't even know whether she actually says that. Now that I think about it, whether she says transgender, but Ziegler's point is that was the context. But maybe the question was, are there assaults happening in the bathrooms or locker rooms with regularity or something like that, right? I think that was the way the question was put. So we'll discount the with regularity thing because that was a throwaway. It changes the nature of the question, but we'll allow her to throw it away. Do you have any information about assaults of any kind ever happening there? And the answer has got to be yes to that, right? But he thinks they're talking about the transgender policy because that's what was being discussed at the time. And he sees a way to say, yeah, all right, so you're asking me, given that we're talking about the transgender policy and the worry that transgender students will lie in wait in the bathrooms to attack people, do we have information about that happening? No, we don't. Although he could certainly have said, well, there's information about people about whom there are doubts about their gender identity. But as it turns out, he could have given a fuller answer there, but he didn't. Now, the day after Scott Smith's arrest, that would be at the meeting, not outside the school, the family posted a brief statement on the public Facebook page of their plumbing company, Plum Crazy, maybe not the greatest name, referring to the, quote, traumatic nightmare that our family, specifically our daughter, has been enduring since our daughter was sexually assaulted in her high school bathroom. I don't know why they capitalized that. Not writing it in all caps, but capital H, capital S, capital B, HSB, high school bathroom, by another student. The Smiths were contacted through a mutual friend by Patty Menders, the president of the Loudoun County Republican Women's Club. She arranged a video call with the couple and Ian Pryor and another parents' rights activist. I was horrified, Pryor later wrote, but I was also intrigued about how this might impact Policy 8040. And the answer is it didn't and shouldn't, but it's his job to make it happen anyway. In 2016 and 2017, Republican state lawmakers across the country, responding to recent court decisions and federal and local policies advancing transgender rights, had introduced 61 so-called bathroom bills, legislation that would legally obligate people to use the public restroom of their birth gender. Many of the bills were based on a model policy drafted by the Alliance Defending Freedom, the organization that later defended Tanner Cross, curiously enough, which had a history of litigating against expansions in LGBTQ rights. Advocates for the legislation often claimed that the bills weren't really about transgender rights at all, but about public safety. It's about preventing a free pass to sexual predators who are not transgender to be able to walk into any bathroom with any child or any woman at any time, Dan Patrick, Texas's lieutenant governor, said at the time. The problem with this argument, and I think you can see it right on its face, the problem with this argument was that there was no evidence. From the few municipalities and school districts with transgender-friendly bathroom policies, no evidence that such policies had led to an increase in sexual assaults. When it came to the safety of transgender and non-binary youths, the opposite was true. A Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health study found that they were more likely to report having been sexually assaulted in their bathrooms and locker rooms than when schools... I'll clarify later. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I want to take it right back up here. I flubbed that line on the way out, so it makes an important point. Right, okay, so the point being established here is that there's no evidence for the Republican claim that there was a danger to other students by letting transgender students use the bathroom with of the gender with which they identify. And that in fact, the opposite was true, and that a Harvard study had found that the transgender students were the ones most likely to report having been sexually assaulted if their bathroom and locker room access at school was restricted. In all but one state, North Carolina, the bathroom bills failed. As Scott Ziegler put it at the June 22nd school board meeting, citing a 2016 Time magazine story, quote, "The predator transgender student or person simply does not exist." Yet, the details of Scott Smith's daughter's assault, the skirt, the bathroom, and Ziegler's denial in the meeting now seemed to potentially suggest otherwise. So sort of a perfect storm of wrongness happening here. Although the full story wasn't known yet, Smith's arrest had already made him a sympathetic figure on the right. Across the country, conservative protests at suburban school board meetings were regularly ending in clashes with law enforcement that were cast as evidence of either an increasingly violent and tantrum-based right-wing politics or liberals' heightened intolerance of dissent, depending, I guess, on where you stand, right? ProPublica tallied 59 arrests, a vast majority of them white suburbanites, at school board meetings over 18 months, starting in May of 2021. In most cases, the charges were dropped, but in Smith's, they were not. Loudoun County's elected prosecutor, Buddha Bibaraj, a Democrat, decided to personally prosecute Smith's case, despite the relatively minor charges of obstruction and disorderly conduct. Now, Bibaraj told me that she did so, this is interesting, because given the intensity of the school board fight, there was likely to be animosity toward the attorney who tried it, she said. In other words, the attorney who tried it would probably be getting death threats from the right. And she said, "I didn't want to subject our attorneys to that. So I'm sure Republicans cast this as, well, she's so power hungry. She, it's this minor case, but she was looking for attention and press coverage for herself so that when she ran for re-election, she could tout this accomplishment or whatever. But her explanation was, no, I didn't want to subject any of the line attorneys to the death threats and harassment that was likely to come from being the one to try the case. A much more noble prospect, right? Smith was convicted and received a suspended sentence. Now, he's appealing his conviction. Now, this is interesting, too, right? A side note in small-ish, even though they just described the significant growth in Loudoun County's size, but I guess in certain communities, things are still pretty small. The judge in the case, Smith's case, is, one, a Republican, but two, a Republican who had served as the county's prosecutor before Buddha Bibaraj. And guess what happened? So I don't know whether he was the incumbent and running for re-election. I can't remember. And Buddha Bibaraj unseats him or what. Now he's a judge and he's presiding over this case where she is prosecuting the case personally. And the judge apparently has since ordered Buddha Bibaraj removed from the case, citing, quote, concerns about public confidence in the integrity of the prosecution. Aha. Okay. So once again, a Republican attack on the integrity of the legal system. But there you have it. Lots of tendrils from this case interconnecting with various other Republican schemes around the state and around the country. On August 11th, as the school board met and passed Policy 8040, parents' rights activists held a rally outside the administration building. One of the speakers was Dick Black, well known to me, the Republican former state senator who, at the chaotic June meeting, claimed that board members were forcing school children to lie about gender. He was mentioned earlier in the story, but not by name. Now, the winds of an approaching thunderstorm rippled a Protect Every Kid banner as Black denounced the board. They're scared of the public, he shouted. They're scared of the voters. Dick Black has been mentioned on this show a couple of times in the past. He was the one state legislator who used to bring it back to abortion, debate on the state Senate floor about the subject and hand out little tiny plastic fetuses, which he claimed this is what these babies look like when they're being aborted. And they were, in fact, he's talking about an age when they're an embryo. They don't look like that. But, that kind of weirdo, little plastic fetuses. I don't think so, pal. Anyway, then Black told the full, maybe, story of Scott Smith's arrest at the last meeting, the first time anyone had done so publicly, though he didn't name him. His daughter at Stonebridge High School had one of these guys wearing a girl's dress go into the girl's bathroom and forcibly sodomize her, Black said. The crowd erupted into boos. I mean, you should be booing forcible sodomy. Go ahead. That was the man who was arrested. But once again, he was arrested because he was protesting his daughter's rape and they hate conservatives. And that's why they did it. As opposed to he came in and threatened the cops and threatened the kid and brought no ID and said, you're going to have to effing tackle me. All the things that are red flags when dealing with a public system of any kind. A week and a half after Scott Smith's arrest, the county sheriff's office had finally filed felony sexual assault charges against the boy, and he was taken into custody in early July. By the way, just stopping to clarify, when Dick Black is saying that's who was arrested, the arrest, of course, came at the school board meeting some months later, not at the school. I don't believe he was arrested at the school, but at the school board meeting, it was when he ended up arguing with another parent there and calling her a bitch, and the cops grab a hold of him and, we can't have this thing escalating. And then he fights the cops and then he's bewildered as to why he's being arrested. Anyway, similarly, bewildered as to why he was being escorted out of the school, bewildered as to why he keeps getting in trouble with cops. It's because you're too belligerent. I understand your motivation, but you're going to have to grow up. So this is the only way to force it, apparently. Okay, so a week and a half after Smith's arrest at the prior school board meeting in May, right, the county sheriff's office had finally filed the sexual assault charges against the boy, taking him into custody in early July. A notification of the charges against him, the only formal notification the school district was to receive, was sent to the district that month. But it was addressed to an employee who no longer worked in the central administration and, according to officials, was misplaced in the interoffice mail. Another error to add to the comedy here, if you will. And nothing comic about it, but that's the phrasing. The boy's mother was attending a juvenile court hearing in August when she realized that nobody in the district had yet contacted her with a plan for where her son was to be placed the coming year, since he was not allowed to return to Stone Bridge. She reached out to an administrator who initiated a transfer to another school in Ashburn, Broad Run High School. Then she arranged a meeting with David Spage, maybe, S-P-A-G-E, the school's principal, and other school administrators. They were made aware of the charges, she recalled. Still, the boy was enrolled in regular classroom instruction. Spage declined to comment. I guess he could have been diverted into some sort of internal disciplinary program instead, but wasn't. Soon after the boy started at Broad Run, reports began arriving in Spage's office. An art teacher who had the boy in her class reported that 2 female students had complained that he was following them around and asked to be seated away from him in class. In an English class, the boy made sexual comments to a girl, grabbed her roughly by the shoulder, and asked if she had posted any nude photos online. The only disciplinary measure the school took was asking the boy to write a brief statement. "I will not touch others," he wrote on a sheet of notebook paper. "I will not ask for photos." That is certainly weak sauce. In the afternoon of October 6th, the boy's mother was at work when she received a voicemail message from Corinne, Sekaj? I don't know. C-Z-E-K-A-J. Chekaj, maybe. The detective from the sheriff's office who was running an investigation into the May bathroom assault. And the detective said she was at Broad Run. "I need you to give me a call," she said. The second assault victim, you know what happens here. The second assault victim was also a girl that the boy knew. He had asked her to walk with him between classes, and she agreed. I mean, that's a reasonable request. Video footage from the school's security cameras captured him putting his arm around the girl's neck and pulling her into an empty classroom. There, he held her in a chokehold and groped her. On October 7th, the sheriff's office put out a brief statement. Within hours, the assailant's identity had circulated among the district's parents, including Ian Pryor. So what does Pryor do? Pryor called Luke Rosiak, a reporter for the Daily Wire. "Dude," Pryor recalled telling him, "this is the same kid." A conservative media company co-founded by the pundit Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire had become particularly dedicated to hostile coverage of gender ideology and was home to prominent right-wing commentators who were frank about their aim to, as the contributor Michael Knowles later put it, quote, "eradicate transgenderism from public life," unquote. In September, with the assistance of the County Republican Women's Club president, Patty Menders, the Daily Wire commentator Matt Walsh attended a Loudoun County School Board meeting and spoke during the public comment period. "Get lost, you're not from here. You are all child abusers," he told them. "You prey upon impressionable children and indoctrinate them into your insane ideological cult." A video that Walsh posted of his remarks received more than 10 million views on YouTube. Rosiak was more of a reporter than a polemicist, and for a year he had been perhaps the most dogged chronicler of the dramas and outrages of around the Loudoun County schools, a favorite journalist contact among local activists. He had been talking to Scott Smith for months. In the article he published that week, the disparate outrages of Loudoun County became a single story, culminating in the second assault, all the pieces snapping into place with an almost audible click. Smith had wanted justice for his daughter, and for his efforts had been persecuted and humiliated at every turn by Loudoun County's liberal school administrators working hand in glove with local Democratic elected officials, as opposed to he's too blustery and violent to deal with as an adult. And he keeps getting himself into legal trouble because he thinks he's Mr. Blue-Collar plumber guy, and that's to be expected of us. We don't conduct ourselves in suit and tie manner. We use fisticuffs, and that's manly. Well, that actually will get you in trouble. Noting that the school board was in the middle of trying to pass policy 8040, which hadn't happened yet, and so therefore had no bearing on what had happened in the assault, Rosiak pointed to the significance of the meeting exchange between Bartz and Ziegler, in which Ziegler denied knowledge of any assaults in school bathrooms. A school policy passed following what appeared to be false statements from the superintendent, a policy whose passage would have been politically impossible had Smith's story seen the light of day, Rosiak wrote, or really opined. Appearing on Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox News that evening, he went further. It raises the possibility, he said, that the Loudoun County Public Schools covered up the rape of a 14-year-old girl at the hands of a boy wearing a skirt, wink, wink, in order to pass a school policy that Democrats were adamant about passing, and as a result of concealing that, a second girl was raped last week. It's a plausible story, minus an awful lot of context. There had been no second rape, it's pointed out here. The second sexual assault, though it was never fully described by law enforcement, was charged as a misdemeanor. But by now, the story was fast slipping loose of the evidence at hand. A 9th grade girl, 14, reportedly sexually assaulted in a bathroom by a self-described transgender student, wearing a skirt. Carlson told his audience. The girl's age was stated incorrectly, repeatedly. Laura Ingram told her audience, the rights of transgender students being put over the rights of regular folks. I've heard you sick, disgusting pigs are fine with hiding the sexual assault of a young girl behind a trans boy, read one of many death threats that the school board members received. You people need to be arrested, tried, and then hung by the neck until you're dead for hiding this. Virginia was in the midst of course, its governor's race, and the Republican candidate, Glenn Youngkin, had embraced the parents' rights movement. There it is. And embraced its stand in Loudoun County. After the suspension of Tanner Cross, the gym teacher, he went on Fox News to demand his reinstatement. I think they mean Youngkin did. What we're seeing right here, right now in Loudoun County is the liberal left waging a culture war. Every accusation is a confession. And the victims are our children, Youngkin said. In June, he held a rally outside the Loudoun County Schools Administrative Building in Ashburn. His opponent, the former Democratic governor, Terry McAuliffe, had paid little heed to the school's issue. When the subject came up on stage at the candidates' final debate that fall, McAuliffe said, now infamously, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. By the early hours of the following morning, it was the main Fox News headline from the debate. That day, the National School Boards Association, coincidentally enough, sent a letter to President Biden warning that, quote, America's public schools and its education leaders are under an imminent threat, citing months of disruption, threats, and violence directed at school boards and administrators. Remember, you should all be hung by the neck until dead, you sick pigs, etc., etc. It called on the federal government to, quote, investigate, intercept, and prevent the current threats and acts of violence. Its litany of school board meeting unrest included Scott Smith's arrest in Loudoun County. The association's board, under heavy criticism from parents' rights groups and Republican attorneys general, would apologize for the letter, but not before Attorney General Merrick Garland directed the FBI to discuss strategies for addressing such threats with local authorities. Of course, they probably should never have apologized for the letter. They should have doubled down and stood by it. Republicans certainly would have. They were right. There was the mention earlier of how many incidents of threats of violence to how many different jurisdictions over the 18 months that they studied this? In his campaign speeches, Youngkin connected the dots. For months, we've seen chaos seep into our schools, he said at a rally in late October. A new instance each week until the unthinkable happened. Virginia and America awoke to the news that a young teenage girl had been sexually assaulted in her Loudoun County school. And worse, the school administrators covered it up, and Loudoun's Commonwealth attorney targeted the victim's family for his assaults of police and fellow meeting goers. That's why he was targeted. But no mention of that. Simply because he's conservative. It's a culture war, I tell you. On November 2nd, Youngkin, who had been trailing significantly in late September polls, beat McAuliffe by 2 points. Within hours, Loudoun County, which McAuliffe won, but by 10 points less than Northam had in 2017, went from scandal to strategy. The day after the election, Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, announced plans to introduce legislation establishing a Parents' Bill of Rights. It passed the House quickly, but was never voted on in the Senate. We watched parents come to school board meetings craving to have input. A father getting arrested when his daughter was molested in a bathroom, McCarthy told reporters. Yeah, he was arrested for assaulting the cops when they asked him to stop berating other parents, not because his daughter was molested in the bathroom. This year, Ian Pryor published a book titled Parents of the World Unite, ironically enough, because they hate communism, How to Save Our Schools from the Left's Radical Agenda, which he billed as a sort of art of war for parents' rights activists, which is amazing. So now there's an art of war book for the strategy that doesn't work and is getting crushed wherever it, is confronted directly. In Loudoun County, he believed, parents' rights activists had done something rarer than succeeding at politics. They had succeeded in creating the conditions of politics. They're very high on their own supply, no doubt about it. It's like we built this wave, Pryor told me, and he, Youngkin, did a good job of getting on the surfboard and riding the wave. But then the red wave turned out not to be real and dissipated once it left Virginia, by the way. The political afterlife of the assaults was impossible to separate from the factual void that lay at the heart of the scandal. The ages of the assailant and both victims had kept the Loudoun County School District and Sheriff's Office from releasing more than the bare minimum of information about either case. The families involved had remained silent and unidentified, with one exception, Scott and Jessica Smith. Their account had been the backbone of the Daily Wire story, and Scott Smith, who had tried unsuccessfully to land an interview with Tucker Carlson after his daughter's assault, and again after his arrest, was suddenly an in-demand presence on Fox News' primetime lineup. If we didn't do this, stand up, no one would know what happened in Loudoun County, Smith told me. He wasn't wrong. In the absence of other sources, his story stood for more than a year as the story. He was the apparent sole source, for instance, of a key detail that made the story incendiary in the first place, the claim that the boy who assaulted his daughter identified as gender fluid. But on this score, Smith's account had changed. At first, in the Daily Wire story, he told Rosiak, quote, "The person that attacked our daughter is apparently bisexual and occasionally wears dresses because he likes them." He went on. So this kid is technically not what the school board was fighting about. Within days, though, he said in a statement to the news media through his attorney, quote, "The facts are that a male student claiming to be gender fluid was permitted to enter the girls' bathroom on May 28th and sexually assaulted our daughter," unquote. None of which is actually true except for the assault part. I mean, that's the key part. True. No, he doesn't identify as gender fluid. No, he wasn't permitted to enter the girls' bathroom. But yes, he did sexually assault your daughter. When I asked Smith how he knew any of this, he replied, "I didn't really know at first, to be honest." Well, that's odd. He said that evidence he saw much later during the investigation the school district conducted after the second assault, including a law enforcement interview with the assailant, made clear that the boy identified as, quote, pansexual. Now, parenthetically, it here says, the boy's mother told me that she did not know where that description of her son as pansexual originated. I don't really understand pansexual exactly, Smith conceded. There was nothing in the evidence he had seen, he said, that gave him any reason to believe that he wanted to necessarily have a sex change. I think he's just a sexual deviant, expressing his, I don't know. All right, there it is. I don't know. Now, pansexuality, or attraction toward people regardless of their sexual or gender identity, is categorically different from gender fluidity. It is a sexual orientation, not a gender identity, and so a self-identified pansexual would not have been allowed into the girls' bathroom under Policy 8040, as Smith himself seemed to recognize in the Daily Wire interview. It's amazing that they let him get away with it. Why didn't they change it in the Daily Wire? Kudos to them for printing the fact that he didn't know what he was talking about, I guess. Didn't matter to them because they were going to do something totally different with it anyway. Confusion on this point would persist in commentary on the case, and to this day. Some of it no doubt willful, but it also reflected the vast gulf between the vanguard of the discourse on gender and sexuality, which increasingly shaped school policies, and the popular awareness of it. Ziegler and other administrators and school board members spoke fluently of gender identity and gender expression, but how many of the parents in the district could have defined the differences between the terms? Good point. In late October, Smith's daughter testified in the juvenile trial of her assailant. To the displeasure of the parents of both the accused boy and the victim, the judge made the unusual decision to open the trial to a handful of reporters, an indication of the sheer volume of media attention that now surrounded it. The trial was the first time any of the three teenagers at the heart of the scandal spoke publicly about it. In court, the story the girl told was, if not wholly different from her father's, more complicated. She had been involved with the boy, she said, and remember, Dad swore there was no chance of that being true. She had been involved with the boy, she said, and on May 28th, they went to the bathroom together. It was only once they were in the stall together that the encounter turned non-consensual. It was, in her telling, clearly a sexual assault. But in the published accounts of the trial, no one who testified described the boy claiming to be anything in order to enter the bathroom, or suggested that he had required any artifice to do so. He was found guilty of 2 counts of forcible sodomy in the first incident and pleaded no contest to felony abduction and misdemeanor sexual battery in the second. The boy did not testify at the trial, nor did the victim of the second assault. He was sent to a residential treatment program. The juvenile trial knocked down one of the central claims of the narrative of the scandal, but it did not address the other, that the school administrators had been sufficiently concerned about the question of the boy's gender that they had buried the assault, perhaps in collusion with the school board. The Bartz-Ziegler exchange about bathroom assaults remained, to the parents' rights activists and their political allies, a clear indication of a cover-up. Jason Miyares, the Republican candidate for Attorney General in that fall's election, had, like Youngkin, leaned into the Loudoun County outrage during his campaign and built relationships with the local parents' rights activists over the summer. In July, he spoke at a fundraiser for Pryor's group, Fight for Schools. After winning his race in November, he hired as his community liaison Patty Menders, the Loudoun County Republican Women's Club president who had arranged the call between the Smiths and Ian Pryor. At a news conference 2 days after the election, a reporter asked Miyares, "Do you plan to investigate Loudoun County Public Schools and the recent sexual assaults that have happened there?" "Yes," Miyares replied. "What we saw was a school board that went woke. And I like to say, once you go woke, you go broke." That's pretty dumb, but that's Miyares telling Sean Hannity in January of 2022, shortly after Youngkin signed an executive order authorizing a state investigation. "They've played politics with our children's safety, and they passed a policy. And obviously, as you noted, there was a tragic, violent sexual assault that happened." Conflating the facts. Miyares asked for a special grand jury to be impaneled that March, but when the special grand jury's report was unsealed in December, the direct line from politics to tragedy that he had promised was nowhere to be found. The second assault could have and should have been prevented, the report argued, but it concluded that there was not a coordinated cover-up between administrators and school board members. Out of more than 100 pieces of evidence the special grand jury reviewed from the school district and the school board, the report presented only one: suggesting that Policy 84 might have factored into the handling of the case. That was the email from Kevin Lewis, the district's chief operations officer, calling the virtual meeting on the afternoon of the first assault, in which he said the incident was related to the pending policy, because he was mistaken. According to the report, both the school administration and the school board seemed to have done their best to conceal that email from investigators. That ain't good. In their sworn testimony, administrators who attended the virtual meeting claimed to have forgotten anything of consequence that was said on the call. We believe, the report concluded bluntly, that there was intentional institutional amnesia regarding this meeting. All right, we're late with the outro music and nearing the end of the article, but not all the way there. But this was the crux of the case. Depending on one's politics, the administrator's behavior was a validation of the parents' rights activists' allegation, or run-of-the-mill bureaucratic defensiveness, or justifiable outmaneuvering of an inquiry that school officials by that point had cause to view as a partisan fishing expedition, a sort of Hunter Biden investigation in Loudoun County. That all of these things looked the same from the outside explained how much of how the politics of the county's schools had grown so poisonous. Shortly after the report's release, Smith and Pryor appeared together on Laura Ingram's Fox News show. Smith seemed deflated by the report, which pretty much told us what we already knew. There's nobody held accountable by name. Pryor was more sanguine. I suspect we could see more down the road in the very near future. Sure enough, the following week, Miares' office unsealed 3 indictments against Scott Ziegler, the superintendent. Now, that trial is set to begin, I believe, this month. There's more to this story. As you know, Wade Byard was immediately acquitted in all of this. But you begin to see how these threads of this story infect and become entangled with everything else that they're doing, up to and including the results of Ohio last night.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, of course, there's more news out there, and Justice Putnam will be dedicated to rounding it up in his own way on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next right here on Networks Radio. He'll be covering the Ohio story, sure, but stuff from around the country and around the world, as usual. And, well, I've run out of time to tell you more about it, but that's okay, because he's here to do it next.